apologize for running just a little bit behind schedule. We had a couple of technical issues on our end, so thank you for bearing with us. Hopefully you're still around. So we are so excited to be unlearning tonight with our fabulous guest, Da'Mon Stith. Hi, Da'Mon. Welcome. Da'Mon. Yes. I'm just going to give everyone a little bit of your bio, Da'Mon, so our guests know who we are talking to and who we're talking about. Da'Mon is the chief instructor and founder of the Guild of the Silent Sword. His martial arts training began at the age of 6 when his father gave him his first sword. I keep saying you are here, fascinated with martial arts and warrior culture, and began formal training at the age of 9 in Asian martial arts, which I think is where a lot of us, I'll include myself for sure, begin our martial arts training, and then progressed into African and Middle Eastern martial arts by 17. Very impressive resume. Da'Mon also constructs training weaponry from plastic, hardwood, aluminum, steel, sort of like you name it across the board in terms of stage combat or training weaponry. Da'Mon can make it and it'll be beautiful. And he is also an instructor for the Book People's Camp Half-Blood Literary Camp. Go Percy Jackson fans, huzzah! So that is who Da'Mon is. And tonight we're going to be talking about his expertise in all of these things. The Unlearning series is an opportunity for we, the Vixens, who are largely stage combat artists, which is focused mostly in European style martial arts, to talk about some of the ways our arts overlap and intersect. And Da'Mon is also an incredible stage combat teacher. Several of the Vixens and I have had the opportunity to take classes from you in the online world now that it's easier to get in touch with folks who aren't in the same place, which is the only maybe benefit of the pandemic that has come out. But yes, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny you say that. We've had this technology for years, but we never, I've never really thought about using it in this way until like now. And so now, doing Zoom meetings and Zoom chats with people from across the world, and it's pretty amazing that we have this access to this. Unfortunately, the times that we live in, but we're here now, so.
Absolutely. And we should then take full advantage of being able to talk to you and using our time. So I have a couple of topics and questions, and then we can always just sort of let the conversation go where it wants to go. But I would love to know, what first drew you to historical African martial arts?
All right, so that is a very, very long circular answer to that question.
We are ready to listen.
And, okay, all right. Well, I'm going to talk, and you guys just make faces at me if I freeze or something, okay? So, like my bio says, I began training when I was 6, right? Well, training as a 6-year-old can. Just really enamored and fascinated with martial arts and the story of the hero. What kid isn't? We're all experiencing and exploring the hero's journey in our life in different ways. Whether we're looking at like Clash of the Titans and Excalibur, or we're like watching Saved by the Bell. I'm an old man. You guys probably don't know what Saved by the Bell is, but look it up. It's terrible. But it was great in the 90s. But
there are definitely people here who are too young for Saved by the Bell, but some of us grew up on that.
Okay.
Not giving our age, Lisa.
I said some of us.
Well, so
you outed yourself, girl.
Yeah, it's true. It's okay. I'm the grandfather here, so but when so as a kid, I was really interested in the hero's journey, and more importantly, trying to figure out where I fit in the story. Growing up in the 80s, this was not a time. Yep, not a time of diversity whatsoever. Not in media, and definitely not in education. So there wasn't a lot. I didn't learn a lot about myself, about my culture or my history in school. And actually, for me, it was like a badge of shame because the way that Africa was presented and in media, and just the level of disregard it was given as far as like education goes. Like I tell this story so many times about how like our history book was, and I remember this very distinctly. It was a page that was dedicated to Africa, and it was a paragraph that actually spoke about Africa outside of slavery, just a paragraph. So that kind of created this, as a young person, this like cycle of self-hatred that I felt, and it was kind of an insidious thing because you don't really realize that there's a part of you that you're not quite coming to terms with and embracing, and that you're actually trying really hard to cover up and to hide. So I had that vacuum in me just as a young person on one end. And then I have this really love that I have just for like all martial arts and all sword fighting and all these things. So, I delve into this, and then I delve into the martial arts, and I ignore and deal with the other stuff when I'm able to, when I have the tools to deal with it. So, and that wouldn't come for many, many years. I think the first example of that was when I first saw, I remember when I was in not ninth grade, but I was nine. I was in third or fourth grade. And in one of our social studies book, there was a picture of a Tuareg warrior on camelback. And this was the first time I had seen a brown person with a sword. Like, it sounds crazy for me to say it. It was a modern picture, but this was the first time I had actually connected these two things as a kid. And then later on, when I'm a teenager, shout out to Miss Gross. Miss Gross was the hardest, most hardest. You didn't cross her at all in school. She was my 8th grade world regions teacher, and she was hardcore. And I will go on the record and say, you either loved her, but it was like loving something very painful, or you didn't really like her. And I remember during class, we were going through the different regions of the world and its history. And when we got to the section of Africa, she told us to, there was this thing back in the days we used to carry to class called books, right? And they were like humongous pieces of torture devices. Yeah. Well, now everything is online. It's like little everything is digital and stuff now. But carrying these big heavy books to class, and the World Regions book was a real heavy book. And I remember all my classmates were all excited about not having to like carry this extra book to class. What really caught me was the afterthought that she expressed. And because what she said is that, because what we're going to talk about this next week or so is not going to be found in this big, thick book, right? And so this was the first time I heard about African kingdoms and empires and generals and queens and kings and all of that stuff. And she taught us about Ghana and Mali and Songhai, about the Moors and Hannibal and Egypt and Kush and all these things. I'm still in a different world, like I'm still kind of just doing my own thing, just trying to be Da'Mon, trying to figure out who that guy is. At the same time, she dropped this seed in my mind and in my heart that it wasn't until even like maybe like a sophomore or junior in high school where it actually started to germinate and grow, and I started to actively like seek, African history and really like look at it. And again, these two things haven't wedded in my mind, right? So I'm still just a martial arts guy on one side. I'm a big martial arts nerd on one side, right? And then I'm learning about history because I wasn't really that much of a reader as a kid, but delving into history and reading the stories as a teenager got me really into reading. So I'm starting to kind of develop this like thirst and hunger for that. So as my bio says, I started in Asian martial arts. So I started in karate at 9. I did a Okinawan style Shorin-ryu. Again, I'm gonna date myself. So my instructor, I think his name was Bob. This was like at a youth center. I remember he was so super excited because the Karate Kid had just came out. Now I'm not, I think I'm frozen. I'm not talking about the Karate Kid with Jaden Smith or with or Kokai. I'm talking about the original Karate Kid coming out in theaters. He was super excited because it was like the crane kick and everything. But we'll talk about Ralph Macchio. Everyone loved Ralph Macchio. He looks great. Like he's like 100, and he looks like he's like 19. Like it's amazing. My father was in the military, so that allowed me to travel around a lot. So I had the opportunity to go to Okinawa, Japan, and actually study Shorin-ryu in its roots under its grandmaster. And actually, the grandmaster's son was my sensei. And I was really like, because when I was a kid, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this karate thing. I have a story about that. We'll talk about it. But I was like, yeah, let me do the karate thing. And I did things I just didn't like about it. It was like, okay, I like the punching and the kicking. I was definitely the kid that's like, hey, I want to get in and kick some ass, and I didn't want to learn katas and all that kind of stuff. But then when I got older, I was like, you know what? Let me try this again with a little more focus, a little more maturity. Let me learn my katas and let me kind of like really just delve into it. So when I went to Okinawa, I had the opportunity to explore it in that way. I told you the story is long. I'm sorry. Okay, as long as y'all are okay.
No, this is amazing. This is fascinating, and it helps us get to know you. We love it.
Okay, just give me the thumbs when it starts to get not amazing. It starts to kind of get in there, and I'm like, okay, I'll wrap it up.
No thumbs. I'm cutting off everybody's thumbs. All
right. So, an interesting thing happened when I was in Okinawa training. I was a martial arts nerd, as I've said, and I was also a nerd of another kind. And I remember I was like looking for books of Lord of the Rings, right? And I was in the library, the Kadena-based Air Force Base library, and I was just looking up stuff. I was looking up rings, right? And I came across this book that really stood out to me. And the book was The Book of the Five Rings, Go-Rin Sho, written by Miyamoto Musashi. So I go and I find this book. I'm 13, mind you. I go and I find this book, little thin book, but the image shows this ink drawing of a samurai using two swords, wooden swords, and it's a drawing of Miyamoto Musashi. So like, oh, what's this? So I'm reading this, and this book just kind of really put my training and put my understanding of martial arts in a tailspin. So in those days, martial arts was very limited in what people considered martial arts to be. So like fencing and boxing and wrestling, these things in the wee days of the 80s weren't considered martial arts. They were just considered like sports or activities that Westerners did. But the martial arts were particularly from Asia, and they were particularly from East Asia. So Kung Fu, karate, Taekwondo, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido. Those were martial arts. And those last three I just named, they were exotic martial arts to the world. You know, karate was not exotic in a sense, but those other ones were kind of exotic. So when I was reading Miyamoto Musashi, because he stressed how the way of the warrior could be found in many aspects of life. And one image he when he's describing the carpenter and how the carpenter decides can look at wood and decide like which parts of the wood can serve best as a beam or as a support or as a, you know, whatever the case may be. And there was this strategic specialization and understanding of your trade to that extent. And that was like what it meant to be like a martial artist, like this not just punch, kick, whatever else, but having this expansive, wide-reaching understanding of your field and things that relate to it. In addition to that, he mentioned how it was important for warriors to not only to practice fencing with the sword, but also to practice calligraphy, to practice painting, to practice poetry, and, you know, really this artistic expression was an important part of your training. And that really struck me because, you know, it made me feel like martial arts as a form of self-expression, which was, you know, something that I was looking for, trying to find myself in this world and try to find this understanding of myself. So then that happened to me when I first got to the island, right? 13, that kind of blew my mind, right? Then, of course, like I'm going to continue to have big martial arts nerd. And my pastimes were spent exploring the city. I had the honor and the benefit of living off base, you know, for the first year, and I really enjoyed just like walking around my neighborhood and just like seeing just all the different sites in my neighborhood. It was like there's this cluster of different sensations, different colors, different shapes, different styles of buildings. Yeah, it was just like it was a lot for me to take in. So I really enjoyed walking through my city and just kind of experiencing that. But when I was not doing that, I was at home watching a ton of martial arts movies. There was no cable TV in Okinawa, so everyone built this collection of videotapes and stuff to, you know, watch these movies. So I watched a bunch of really, 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 really bad and poorly made and poorly scripted and poorly choreographed, but they were great movies. But this is what I spent my time doing. So like everyone else, you know, I was really into Bruce Lee, and I got even more into Bruce Lee when I could actually, because the only movies I saw from Bruce was Enter the Dragon and Chinese Connection, which was circulating on HBO. But then I got to see other movies from Bruce Lee, and I was like, and then Bruce Lee impersonators. I was like, oh man, this is great. So really, really got into Bruce Lee. And then I discovered that he was actually, he had written a few books, and I got his book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do. And that really, Miyamoto Musashi sent me in a tailspin. The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, just like completely, I had to throw away everything from at that point. When I experienced that, because it took what Miyamoto Musashi was saying, and then it put it in a different context and kind of even added more dimensions, especially like during, you know, in modern times. You know, it's hard to relate to a guy who had, you know, fought 70 something duels. You know, his first duel being at 13. Side note, my first duel was at 13 too. We'll talk about that.
Yes.
But I don't know if the statute of limitations, I might get in trouble. But
I mean, we're barely living under any sort of rule or law right now.
You're right. It's pretty much The Walking Dead right now. Okay, that's coming. But what Jeet Kune Do got me is like definitely martial arts as a vehicle for self-expression. But then it also showed me that there were martial arts from that the family of martial arts is a lot larger. Like it wasn't just China, Japan, and Korea now. Jeet Kune Do was embracing fighting arts from Southeast Asia, like Muay Thai. Particularly for Bruce's writings, you know, he had aspects or he had mentions of Muay Thai and he had mentions of Savate. And I was like, ooh, Savate. Well, that's European. That's Europe now. It's like, oh, so Europe has martial arts. Jeet Kune Do was heavily influenced by fencing and Western boxing. So all of us, and wrestling, you know, when he started to adapt it into his modified Wing Chun. So then you start seeing like, okay, I started to see, well, martial arts is now not just an East Asian thing, it's an all of Asian thing, and it's also a European thing. So I was like, okay, It's like, okay, still I'm doing my studies over here with Africa and then doing my martial arts studies over here. So I stopped training in karate and I started following, you know, Bruce Lee's methodology and eventually getting involved in Jeet Kune Do. I have always had this fantasy of creating my own style or having my own family style or having my own expression, just as a kid. Another funny story will come from this in a moment. But so Bruce Lee's idea of taking what's useful for yourself, and I know that kind of gets bastardized, and a lot of people have certain feelings about what that means and how that is expressed and stuff like that. But in essence, we end up doing that as humans. We find what's useful, what's functional, what brings us peace, what helps us face the next day with courage, and we apply that. And that's basically, you know, in essence, what we're seeing in martial arts. So I started getting involved with Jeet Kune Do, and particularly like with the Jeet Kune Do concepts that's headed by Dan Inosanto. I wasn't officially a student of theirs, but just kind of following their movement. And so, you know, Dan Inosanto is, you know, of a Filipino descent. And so he brought a lot of Southeast Asian martial arts into Jeet Kune Do. So now it was not just, you know, Muay Thai. It was Kali, it was Silat, there was, you know, and these are the main ones here. But so when I saw these Southeast Asian arts, especially Silat and Kali, and even Muay Thai, I started to see a different thing. Like, wow, okay, so these arts, they have fighting, they have weapons, but they also have like, there's this aspect of music and culture and ritual that's associated with these practices. Also, the emphasis on like rhythmic footwork and stepping patterns. I was like, okay, this is really interesting. They're closest to the ground, fighting not just from standing, but also going to the ground. So I was like, okay, this is really, you know, I really kind of got into this stuff. All of this was prepping me for when I was a senior in high school. And in 1993, 94, right after high school, this movie came out called Only the Strong. I know you guys are like, what does that mean? What is Only the Strong? Second part of your homework, look up Only the Strong. Terrible movie. Terrible movie. But this movie introduced the African Brazilian martial art. Am I frozen? Okay. I don't know if I'm frozen or not, but I'll keep talking. But it introduced the African Brazilian martial art of Capoeira to the world. I must be frozen. I'm going to wait for a second. I'll pause.
We can actually still hear you, even if your video is lagging a little bit. We've been able to hear you the whole time.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'll keep talking then. So when I saw Only the Strong, I was immediately really awed by the martial art. I knew nothing about it. I'd never seen it before. But there was something that really connected it to Africa, whether it was the practitioners that seen on the beach. The practitioners were were of African descent, the emphasis on dance and music and movement, whatever it was, it really, really made an impression on me. And I was really like, oh, wow, I really want to learn how to do this. I really want to learn more about this art. Well, there's not a lot of information out at that time. So, I decided to do what I had to do, which is watch the movie a million times and pick up techniques that I could from the movie until I could do better. So I was introduced to Capoeira, and I didn't really see it as necessarily as a functional fighting art, but I thought it was a very beautiful movement that really spoke to me. And one of the things I during those times, I remember spending time with my mom. We would always go to the bookstores, local bookstores, and then the other ones that came to town eventually. And I remember, going to the martial arts section and, coming across new books. And there was like this book on Capoeira one day, in the bookstore. And I bought it, and I would continue with that, just to buy whatever I could whenever it came out. And so I started learning about how Capoeira was, from an academic standpoint. It's discussions about its origins, which usually doesn't really happen sometimes. It's kind of like you're given like one quick description, and then you get into learning. But because my exposure to it came from reading academic writings and stuff, I got to kind of see how scholars were trying to situate it and talk about its origins. And what that did for me was, what the result was, is that in my mind, I said, well, it appears that Capoeira was derived from an older fighting style that was practiced either in West or Central Africa, and that was brought to the Americas during the slave trade. And that there are several sister arts that are practiced in the African diaspora that have connections and roots to the same region. So that is what catapulted me over to look to the continent for, fighting arts that preceded the arts from the African diaspora. So that's my long story from there. So from there, it began to snowball a bit. I went to the earliest documented places for martial arts in Africa, which was Egypt, and then it started to snowball. But primarily, Capoeira was my vehicle to get there. I could have just said, well, Capoeira was my vehicle to get to this point, but I took it.
No, but it's so interesting to see how, despite the fact that many people, probably less so you, but I think a lot of people think of those different martial arts as occupying like totally different like spaces. They're stylistically very different. The cultures they come from are very different, but it's fascinating to see how in reality they're all interconnected and each one speaks to another. And even if it doesn't seem on the surface like Aikido is talking to Silat or to an Egyptian martial art, there's a through line through all of it. And actually just tracing that journey was amazing to listen to. I know I have some other things that I want to dig into, but I also know that there are some questions from the chat that have come up from that, which is not surprising. That was a phenomenal journey through your life. Thank you.
Sorry to take it so long, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was amazing. Robbie wanted to thank you for your input on how to make everything channel. It filled his soul, he said, first of all. And then the question from Robbie is, how did you find out about the Egyptian fighting style?
Okay. Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate it. Oh, wow. So it started off with, so after I've gotten my sea legs, so to speak, with Capoeira, right? And so then I'm looking for other fighting arts. Sorry, there's a train going by. Other fighting arts from Africa. And there's a gentleman, and he actually just recently passed away during this. He passed away from COVID. He was a early pioneer of African martial arts in the United States. His name was Kalindi E. And he had a system that it was his own personal system that kind of combined many different aspects, different fighting systems from around the continent, and his own martial experience. But he had 2 videos that he did on African fighting arts, and one video dealing with weaponry, which, and I'll double back to that in a moment, just to kind of give him his props. But it was his video on African weaponry that that kind of led me in that direction, because he brought out the nabut, which is roughly about a 4-foot staff that's used in tahtib. Tahtib is an Egyptian stick fighting art that's still practiced today. It's being revitalized by the modern tahtib organization. But by him showing the stick fighting with the nabut is what got me into thinking about that. So from there was another gentleman, and I can't remember his name. He actually did a book on Nuba wrestling, and he actually looked at the iconography from Beni Hassan, and he was showing like different wrestling holds and different positions and stuff that you would find, in Beni Hassan. And he wrote a little small booklet on that. I never really seen the book, but I was really inspired by his research. And actually, I kind of use that. I use that same model when I'm reconstructing the Egyptian arts. Whereas since there's no manuals on Egyptian fighting, so what we have to do, or what I have found for myself is I'm saying we in the royal plural. What I use is the iconography as it relates to warfare, or even as it relates to action and movement. And then I use living traditions that are practiced in the area today. So that would be like tahtib, or that would be like Nuba stick fighting, or Nuba wrestling, or Nuba stick and shield fighting, to kind of help fill in some of the gaps. So basically, the short answer is, now that I'm aware, once Egypt was on my radar as a source for early information, I used like the primary text would be like iconography, determining like what they were trying to depict and display. What's really amazing about Beni Hassan is that you don't really see anything that's like different and new. You're not looking at, it's primarily wrestling, but you don't see anything that's like, oh wow, there's like a new hip toss or a new movement. What's really amazing is that you're seeing movements that were documented, that were familiar enough to a scribe for them to be able to depict in clarity that this is what they're doing 5,000 years ago, a movement that we still do today, and a movement that you'll find in many different wrestling traditions. And that's the part that's really, really amazing to me, is when I see that come to life. And it's like, oh, wow, like this was something. Some of the images are a little hard to decide because they're all twisted up and pretzeled up with each other. But when you do get those images where it's like it's clear what the artist is trying to depict, and that's what's really amazing to me. The same thing applies for like the stick fighting. The Egyptians were used like at least, or were aware, they had a very advanced understanding of stick fighting. They use the stick in many different modalities. They use the long stick, they use single stick, they use stick and shield, and they use double stick. And they probably had other configurations like long stick and short stick as well, but I don't really know for certain. Oh, then they had the super long sticks, the punting poles that they would use when they do the water jousting. And some of these things you can see correlations today. So like when you look at the Egyptian artwork and then you look at people like the Nuba practice, at least I would say, so Egyptians, they wrestled, they boxed, they fought with sticks, and they did archery, right? The Nuba, they wrestle, they stick fight. They have a form of weaponized boxing where they use this wrist knife that takes on the same characteristics of like shield and weapons fighting, where one hand is not, like my left hand would not be armed with the wrist knife, whereas my right hand would have the wrist knife. So, they take these positions that you find, there's only one or two images of Egyptian boxing. And it has that, you can see a similar stance in Pancratian depictions in Greece and in Rome, but they have the depiction of the hands raised with the wrist knife hanging here, or with the fist raised, I should say, and the hand here for the shield. This is the same exact position. I happen to have a little sword with me right here. This is the same exact position you'll see on the battlefield. When guys are going to war, when they're fighting, is like the shield is raised here, the weapon is there. You take those away, and you still have this concept of like the shield and like the weapon. And so, so that's basically it. I just look to see what the Egyptians were depicting, and then try to one, not to overly martialize everything, because as a modern person with a very a wide with a lot of techniques that I have, that we all have, pretty much at our disposal, just by being like, connected, being able to go on to YouTube and say, okay, I'm going to look up Harimau Silat, or I'm going to look up Yahyan, or I'm going to look up some obscure, boxing form that's practiced in the Andes Mountains in Peru. We have a lot of range of stuff that we can look at. So try not to overly martialize what I'm seeing, and keep what I'm seeing and interpreting like very, very simple. I had a point, but I'm getting old and I'm losing all my faculties. So yeah, this is my guy. So I try to like determine like what's the simplest thing they were trying to convey or get across with these movements, and then I look for correlations with modern living traditions. Something a little sick and disturbing that is also very helpful, especially when it comes to Egypt. So the Egyptians didn't write any fight manuals per se, right? But they did write a medical manual on how to deal with injuries, especially injuries that were gotten on the battlefield. And that kind of battlefield forensics gives us a lot of information about what the weapons, how the weapons were used, what their targets were, what it did to the body.
Engineering the fighting style.
Yeah. There is a skull, and I feel bad about saying this because this was a person. There's a skull that had this nasty diagonal slash in the back of its head. And I was like, man, that is terrible. But I was like, okay, at least I know that it did those diagonal cuts, though. I know it's a small sacrifice, but it's a little morbid. But yeah, it comes into this battlefield forensics to help give yourself a clear picture. And then even also just being comfortable with saying, this is what I think. And I'm going to practice this and try to excel at this. But, being prepared to say, okay, maybe I misthought this. Maybe there's something else I need to consider, and being able to go back to the drawing board and refigure some things out. I really like that. It's really humbling to be able to do that. Robbie, I hope I answered that question without overload.
I think that was a phenomenal answer. That actually, several of the things that you mentioned have sparked so many ideas in my head. One primarily that overhead position that you showed, and we're talking about how it shows up in the manuals. It follows battlefield forensics. We still see people in the region practicing moves like this. The thing that immediately resonated for me was German longsword, right? Like this is a position that those of us who practice German longsword know. This is immediately with a rapier instead, this is Capoeira.
Right.
And that's, I think, really fascinating. And one of the things that I was originally thinking that we might poke at is how our African and European martial arts like similar and different, but it seems like bodies are bodies and weapons are weapons, and it doesn't matter when or where you've used them. There are specific ways that are the most effective and efficient.
Yeah, we're going to come across, similar conclusions if we're giving similar tools, and also, so it's kind of like if we are giving similar tools in similar circumstances, we'll probably come up with some similar results, and then there's always the X factor of culture, environment, terrain, temperament. These things also, is what gives the movement its flavor. But in essence, like if I wanted to touch you with my weapon or with a rock or with a whatever, or with a missile or a laser, I mean, I have to travel through it. I have to travel at an angle. Like I have to travel from one point to the next. And that really doesn't change at all between us. We may go about it differently. It may be all the way through. It may be broken. It may be here then there. But, we're bound by those angles. And I think that's what makes what we do, similar. I think that the differences come into play as to why we fight, what we're learning. Why was it, what is it for? Are we fighting on the battlefield? Are we fighting on the battlefield in armor? Are we fighting in the battlefield with no armor? Or is our only armor shield? What's our terrain? Are my objectives on the battlefield to completely destroy and kill everything? Or is it for me, or my objectives to bring back prisoners? All these things, create the reasons why things will be a little different when comparing, side by side. And then, with Europe, and Europe is smaller than Africa, but Europe is very diverse. And Africa is humongous in comparison to Europe and is extremely diverse. And I think that's another thing is it's kind of understanding that things are different. There are some I think some commonalities in a sense, but then there are also some differences that are based on culture and region. And I think that's what I think our physics are the same. It's just the culture, environment, and the reasons is what really makes things different. You had a question. Go ahead.
Well, I had a thought come to mind that you talked earlier about the diaspora, and it made me curious. Not only is there so much diversity on the continent of Africa, but there's also this diversity of what happens to African people in diaspora. And so I'm curious in your research, sort of what you have found, sort of happens in that migration, and how that affects the fighting styles.
Okay, that's a great question. That's going to take about an hour to answer. Thank you. Yeah, so the diaspora is interesting, right? Because things can be argued in different ways, right? Let's start with music. Music is easy, maybe. So, okay, we have jazz, right? none of those instruments in the jazz, and I know nothing about music, by the way, just so you guys know. And I could be completely wrong, so correct me if I am. The instruments that are used in jazz bands are primarily European instruments. They're not. They're mostly all of them, every last one of them, I believe. I mean, there are flutes in Africa and stuff, but I'm just saying. Anyways, there's no flutes in jazz, is there? Yes, there is. I don't know.
Jethro Tull would have things to say.
Well, let me just say that the instruments that are used in jazz are not African instruments, right? But jazz has a very African character through its rhythms and improv. There are people that can speak of much more authority than I can on the subject matter, right? So the question would be like, well, is jazz African music? Then you can say, well, on one aspect you can say yes, but then on one aspect you say, well, no. You can probably just argue that it's just European because it's using European tools. But
Ship of Theseus question: how much of the original material can you strip away and still have it be the original thing?
I think that's a great question. And I think that what we find in the African diaspora, it's built upon principle as opposed to technique. So the principle, and a lot of these arts are coming from Central Africa. So the guiding principle, one of the guiding principles is evasion, dynamic evasion, I will say, corporal dexterity. And what you'll find is, and then I'm also misdirection, this concept of misleading and creating traps within traps. These are all things that you'll find that's part and parcel with Central African style of warfare. These things came over during the slave trade, and they've kind of have left their stamp on the fighting customs in these areas. So Capoeira is a great example. People want to know, like, why there are no blocks in any of these movements. Like you have to like avoid being hit. You do cartwheels, and like what's going on with that? Like, what is that? Well, so in Central Africa, there were a number of dances and martial rituals that the warriors would do to prepare themselves for battle. And a great book to read on this, a couple of great books to read on this. One would be Professor DJ Desh-Obi's book called Fighting for Honor. He's the field authority on this. And then also John Thornton has a book on warfare in the Western Atlantic. And he talks about, kind of reinforces what Professor Desh is talking about as far as Central African style of warfare. And he goes a little bit more in depth, more about the armies and the movements and less about the martial arts per se, but they kind of hit on some of the same beats. But the warriors in Central Africa, according to Thornton, they would arrange themselves in a way when it went to battle in these open skirmishing lines, right? And since most of the warriors didn't carry shields, they had to rely on personal maneuver, meaning personal maneuver as opposed to group maneuver. So if we were in a shield wall in the phalanx, we're locked behind our shields and we're like moving together, right? We're moving together. My partner's shield is covering me and I'm covering my partner, the person to my left, the whole Spartan thing, right? But that's group maneuver. We're moving together in large groups to achieve objectives. When I say personal maneuver, that means that we are arrayed in lines that allow enough space for me to defend myself, whether through voiding and evading or blocking or whatever else. So my partner's shield is not, I don't have a shield to rely on for my defense. I have, if an attack is coming, I have, oh shit, and not get hit. Can I curse? I'm sorry. I should have asked first. Sorry. But
we'll try to keep it PG-13. We get one.
Okay, thank you. So personal maneuver. They develop rituals and games and activities to develop the ability to dodge and slip and evade edge and impact weapons and projectile weapons. And so when they went into battle, they would go into battle in these really large, open, extended, skirmishing lines. Now, what that did is this. If I were to take all you guys and I would smush you guys up into a phalanx without any shields. I like that. Thank you. Without any shields, right? And then we start shooting arrows and throwing spears at you guys. You're gonna be sitting ducks basically because you have no room to move, right? You don't have a shield to be behind. You have no room to move, so you're sitting ducks. So what they would do is they would arrange themselves in these open lines. These open lines allowed them to, if an arrow or a spear is coming towards me, it allows me to move and avoid it. Now, typically their battles would start with projectiles, so arrows and spears, and then they would close into close quarters fighting. And so again, once they got into close quarters fighting, my only defense was my ability to move and not get hit. So these rituals, so one ritual is called an Nsanga, and it's actually it's written in the account by a Jesuit priest who describes the Nsanga just as that, like as a type of military review that the warriors would use to be able to develop this impeccable defensive skills on the battlefield. So you find this same type of emphasis on personal maneuver, me having to worry about not getting hit. Evasion, so like there's evasion, like if someone throws a punch, right? And I boom, slip, punch, boom, slip, right? That's an evasion, right? Cultivating a very dynamic form of evasion, which means when you throw the punch, I don't do a small slip, but I disappear. I change levels. That kind of dynamic evasion, they would practice rituals to help develop that. So then you see that kind of practice carried over into capoeira. Capoeira is the best example of it because you see exactly that. You see very little hard blocking and stopping of attacks. Everything blends with the attack. At the same time, in capoeira, you're actively working on trying to trap, ensnare, and take away the movement of your partner. And you're not just trying to do it in a way, you're not just trying to do it necessarily by any means necessary, but you're trying to do it in a way that makes it look like magic, is my words for it. They would say, I didn't hit you, you ran into my foot. And that level of
you ran into my foot 10 times.
Exactly. And that level of strategy and placement is what the arts they explore that. So for capoeira, that character is directly from the region still. At the same time, when we see the flips and the acrobatic movements and the handstands, and we're like, oh, wow. And we're like, yeah, so, I don't know what this is, but I got an idea. So capoeira is this fighting art, but they were slaves and they couldn't really learn how to fight, right? So what they did is they added dancing and singing and backflips and cartwheels to it so that the slave masters wouldn't know that they were fighting, but they were think they were actually dancing, and let them do this. that is very plausible. It makes sense. That's how things were done in the diaspora, through that style of misdirection, that style of hiding in plain sight. But that's not entirely true. Not entirely true. More closer to the truth is this: the Portuguese knew what capoeira was. They've had a love-hate relationship with capoeira from the beginning. Now, early on, it suited their purposes, the needs to maintain, for the enslaved Africans to maintain their ethnic identities. Considering that Brazil is a place where, you have more people of African descent than many African nations, it made sense to keep this idea of, okay, no, I'm Yoruba, I'm Fulani, I'm Hausa, I'm from Congo, to keep these identities to help keep people separate from each other. Especially, when, revolts were happening in Haiti and things like that. There was some serious things. So there was a time when, the practices of people of African descent wasn't policed in that way. But the times in which they actually started to crack down on capoeira and crack down on other African expressions, and just that, they were cracking down not just on capoeira, but they were cracking down on any forms of African expression or expressions they considered to be subversive or considered to be part of the criminal element of society. So you couldn't hide capoeira of African martial art in an African dance, because they were both being outlawed at the same time. Now, I think that the story of misdirection, I think that comes a little later, when capoeira was trying to fight for social space in Brazil in the 30s, 20s, and 30s, and trying to like I said, it was associated with poor, black, and criminal. That was what it was seen as. And in the 20s and 30s, there was and again, I mentioned this love affair that Brazil had with capoeira, because Brazil as a nation was looking for a national sport, a national identity, especially right before and after the World Wars. They were looking to create this national identity, and especially with an influx of immigrants from Japan and from Europe, who brought their indigenous fighting arts with them to Brazil. They were looking to find fighting arts that are combat sports or national gymnastics that would be, truly their own. And so a couple of times they looked to capoeira for this, but there was a problem that capoeira was just too closely associated with blacks and too closely associated with poor, and they wanted to take away some of those elements. I know I'm going around my question. I have not forgotten my question. Hopefully I'm answering it as I'm touching on all these other things. So there was this love-hate relationship with capoeira, and eventually the two prominent mestres in capoeira were able to actually gain social space for the art, and because it was illegal to practice up into the 30s. I think 1931 is when it was the ban on it was lifted. So during this time, even though capoeira was legal to practice, you could legally do it, it was still very heavily regulated, right? So part of that regulation was you had to gain permits in order to practice it, and you couldn't just do it like now. You can just go play capoeira wherever, right? But then you had to go through the authorities in order to do that. And what I think the reason the the idea that that Capoeira was kind of hiding behind the dance is that I think that as a sacrifice in order to gain this social space, there was a desire to kind of distance themselves from the past. Now I'm just mentioning about it being connected to people of African descent. We haven't even talked about like the criminal element that was, it's hard because, you know, when we say criminal, we think black and white sometimes. And these circumstances that everybody was living in, especially in Brazil, is not very black and white. But let's just say that there was a dark side to Capoeira that was pretty much like Savate. You know, Savate was the same way. Savate was a street art that was practiced by, you know, Parisian street gangs and stuff. And it was pretty rough and tumble, right? Capoeira was the same thing. It had this history and this connection to Central Africa, to Africa. But it also had its teeth to survive in a very duplicitous society that preached things like Christianity on one end, but violated every tenet of their own religion in the enslavement and treatment of people and stuff. So, you know, you'll see Capoeira has a very, very, very hard stance, and we explore very deeply the idea of negotiating and dealing with treachery, watchfulness, constant vigilance, and not just constant vigilance like I'm watching you or I'm watching you, but like watching you in a way that you don't know that I'm watching you, but I'm watching you. These kind of skills were developed during these times, and these were hard times because this was a time when you practiced Capoeira, you were going to get beaten, you were going to get put in prison, you were going to get killed, you were going to get exiled, and that was real deal. Like that was real stuff. A lot of the early police chiefs who were persecuting the capoeiristas in Rio, they were capoeiristas themselves. Like this is some Darth Vader, like Order 66 kind of like stuff. Like seriously, like hunting them down, and you know this was a deal. So there was some really dirty stuff that was going on, and you know the art, you know, dealt with it. You know, Capoeira, we see it now. It's lots of flips and kicks and stuff, but there was also razors, knives, sticks, and everything else as well. And that's because the people that used it, it was an expression. It was part of the culture, but it was also something that they used to help them to survive against, you know, extreme brutality, both from the authorities and both from like environment, you know, and that's real stuff. And I think that the Mestres who were hoping to kind of gain that space for Capoeira wanted to downplay some of that stuff and kind of elevate it more into, you know, being like more of a cultural practice or more of something that could be recognized as like a sport. And this is kind of where the idea of, you know, when the authorities were away, we could play a little harder, you know what I'm saying? Kind of, you know, get a little rough. But when they come back by, the person that's playing the beating bow let us know, okay, hey, let's kind of chill this out a little bit. And then the game gets a little cooler. I think that's where that idea comes from, but I don't think that necessarily reflects the early past. But so to continue to answer the question, and I'm gonna shut up. So Capoeira is a good example of how the art maintains its connection through principle, the lowness of the body, the use of personal maneuver, defense and boarding. Also, the inverted techniques are all based off of Central African cosmology and belief systems, so that we're not just doing like cartwheels just because we're trying to trick somebody and fool someone into thinking we're not doing something. These cartwheels are spiritual representation or expressions of Congolese spirituality. When in Congolese belief, the world was based on a cross. This is before they became Christians kind of early, but they had already had the symbol of the cross as part of their spirituality. And so the cross, it was a cross with a circle in the center. I mean, there's a term for this, and I don't know remember the term. And this circle is bisected, in upper and lower halves. This upper half, it represents our world, the world of the living. This is where we are at. The circle on the half of the circle that's underneath the line, the mirror reflection of our world is the world of the ancestors. And so in Congolese spirituality, you could access the land, the realm of the ancestors by inverting yourself. So you see a lot of movements that come through eversions. They represent going into that world. You guys are all theater people, yes? So like if I'm like on stage, right? I have nothing behind me, just me, right? And if I want to do a scene change, tell me how would I do like a scene change? Like I walk into another room. Who wants to answer that question for me? Hopefully I'm not wrong. Putting you guys on the spot.
You would turn around and then turn back around and you're in a new space.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly right. So this idea of inverting, moving in circular directions, represents changing in dimensions, moving from the mundane world into a special world where you can gain instruction and information and insight. And that is so in Capoeira, the techniques don't matter as much, right? There are certain principles, certain techniques that, that are root techniques, but traditional Capoeira is played very close to the ground, right? More modern styles of Capoeira is played, all kinds of flips and stuff. And many of these flips and kicks and stuff can be considered, adaptations from other arts or from other practices, right? Or there's just this looseness as far as the techniques go. But there's this principle that governs everything, and there's a loose. And I'm saying this with a grain of salt because I'm trying to be as careful with my words as possible. But the point that I'm saying is that whether I throw a kick that's considered to be very modern kick, or if I throw a kick that's considered to be more of a traditional style kick, that doesn't matter as much as those underlying principles that kind of govern the flow of the activity. One more thing to say to this, the social aspect that these arts play in their given communities also is very telltale. In Africa, most martial arts, most combat rituals, they serve a larger purpose than just fighting for the sake of fighting. Whether it's wrestling matches, stick fighting, the ritualized, like weaponized boxing that they do in Sudan, all of these things have to do with society and community. So some practices can be to celebrate certain rites of passage, certain changing of seasons. Some things can embody certain spiritual dramas that are going on. Like for the Egyptians, stick fighting and wrestling were ways they trained the military, but it was also a way they would also use it to reenact the battle between Set and Horus and the rebirth of Osiris. You know what I'm saying? So you have like this greater spiritual narrative that's being retold in these fights. So it can also, these matches can also be used to ensure like boons and benefits from nature. They also serve a purpose of allowing, primarily in these cases, young men or young people to demonstrate their courage and prowess in a way that didn't involve killing each other on a battlefield per se. It allowed people to, display themselves and show that they were brave and had courage and were intelligent or whatever else. So, and then it was also, they served for entertainment as well, and were, the community could come and watch and be entertained by this. And so you see, so whether we're talking about Capoeira in Brazil, or we're talking about Lagia Damier in Martinique, or Kalinda throughout Trinidad, Tobago, or whether we're talking about anyone, Mayole from Guadalupe, all these fighting arts have this same kind of character. And some of them are using sticks, some of them are using, blades, some of them are boxing arts, some of them are wrestling arts, some of them are fighting arts that use punching, kicking, headbutting, and wrestling. All those things are there. But you find the emphasis of community, the principles that govern that govern the dynamics of the play, of the interaction, and then the principles that determine the how you approach the battle, which is usually through using misdirection, deception, trying to outwit, outmaneuver, to trap, and to evade, focusing on defense and body movement. But then also another aspect to it is this personal expression, this personal movement, this style of movement. You see this even in, boxing. You see Black boxers have a certain way that they fight that conforms to this idea of being effective, being unconventional, and also display. There's a certain amount of display that comes with it. And sometimes they get, you get a lot of flack for that, but that's kind of like, it goes back to those earlier forms of, I'm in front of my community, and I want to show and to display that who I am. And, so Western, a boxer of African descent, fighting with their own style, they're not using any techniques that are, necessarily African. They're using Western boxing, but it's that spirit that then they're completely unconscious of it. To be honest, it's something that happens in the community that connects it. So some things are more connected than others, right? So an African-American boxer boxing is one thing, and we can look at it and say, okay, I wouldn't say that they're doing an African martial art per se, but I can see the connection. We'll look at jazz. Okay, I wouldn't say that it's African music, but it's definitely, I can see the principles there. But then when you look at something that's very much, just I'm trying to think of a musical genre to reflect that. And there are many, but they escape me.
Salsa was my first thought.
Salsa. It's just a great example. It's a great example. Yeah. That's derived from that. Some things are more apparent and some clear. So that's the thing with the diaspora, is there's all this stuff is happening while there's this maelstrom of influences and information and stuff that's happening, and it's not as easy, and it's not always clean, and depending on where you're standing on your perspective of it, you may call it a different thing and see it very differently. But those are I told you that was about an hour. I'm sorry.
No, it was incredible. Thank you so much. I know that we all have many, many questions. I wish that we could continue to talk about all of this. Everything that you've said is truly fascinating. You clearly are so passionate about it. You're so deeply knowledgeable. I wish that we could stay here for another hour and a half and talk, but we are, in fact, butting up against the end of our time. So I want to, first of all, thank you, Da'Mon. This has been unbelievable. And believe me, we're all going to be calling you just to talk more and find out more about it. For those in the chat who, haven't been able to be here with you on screen today, we want to let them know where they can, find your weaponry if they want to buy things from you, where they can see where you're teaching, especially if you are doing some things online. Where can people find you?
Everywhere and nowhere.
Welcome to a pandemic.
So
Yep.
my I have a YouTube page, so Da'Mon Stith, just my name on YouTube. I post regularly, classes, sometimes flows, and discussions and stuff. So that's a great way to kind of catch up with me. You can also look me up on I'm on Facebook as my name. You can also look up my organization, HAMA, Historical African Martial Arts Association. We have a YouTube page as well as a Facebook page and a website. It's I don't even know it. It's HAMA at WordPress, I believe. Is where you can find more information about the group and meet some of the other members. If you're interested in like training swords, stage combat, or just you want to cut some stuff, or you want to do some sparring, if you look us up at my website, which is silentsword.org, we have a page for Street Forge Armory, which is my company, and we make these cool things like this and stuff. So I'm sure there's other things. I have an Instagram. It's my name, but it ran together. We also have one for Street Forge Armory as well. Like I said, I'm all over the place. We're trying to get everything reined in and put in a more palatable platform. But right now, I'm all over the place. But yeah.
Well, it's
we also
not a bad way to be. Lots of different ways that people can find you.
And if anyone is ever interested, we do Zoom classes on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. If you guys want to get some weapons training or some empty hands training, I'm going to send y'all the information. I did say that. Thank you, Alexis.
We have a running joke within the company about the phrase "doo-doo." So yes, you do that. Thank you so much. Everyone out there, go follow all of the pages on Facebook. Sign up for the Zoom classes. They are amazing. And just one more big thank you, Da'Mon. This was outstanding, and I wish we could unlearn with you even more. Thank you to everyone who joined us.
Honored to be here.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will see everyone later. Bye.
Right.